How do you handle a toxic work culture? Most people don't ask this question until it's already too late. By the time they notice the exhaustion, the distrust, the quiet resentment spreading like smoke through the hallways, the damage has already begun. Toxicity doesn't announce itself. It creeps in, one ignored comment, one belittling remark, one fear-driven decision at a time, until good people start questioning their worth, their purpose, and their place. But here's the truth we forget. Cultures don't become toxic overnight, and they don't heal overnight. They heal the moment someone decides to stand up and say, enough. Not with aggression, not with rebellion, but with clarity, courage, and a commitment to protect what matters most: trust, dignity, and humanity. Today's conversation isn't just about surviving a toxic culture. It's about becoming the spark that breaks the cycle. Because toxicity only wins when we stay silent. And the moment we choose to speak, to act, to lead, even from the lowest rung of the ladder, everything begins to change. Toxicity grows fastest in the places where people convince themselves to stay quiet. Men especially are taught from a young age to handle it, to endure, to push through without showing weakness. So, when a workplace becomes corrosive, many men internalize the pain, believing that speaking up makes them less resilient. But silence doesn't make you stronger. It simply gives toxicity more room to breathe. When you allow harmful behavior to go unchallenged, you unintentionally become part of the system that keeps everyone stuck in the same cycle of fear and frustration. Women see this silence differently. They often notice the subtle shifts, the withdrawn faces, the defensive tones, the uncomfortable laughter that tries to mask disrespect. Many women learn to read emotional cues that men were never taught to interpret, and they often feel the toxicity long before it becomes visible. Yet even they hesitate, fearing they'll be labeled emotional, dramatic, or difficult. Their silence isn't acceptance, it's self-protection. And still, the culture worsens because everyone is waiting for someone else to make the first move. Calling out toxicity requires a kind of courage that has nothing to do with aggression. True courage is the decision to protect the dignity of people, including yourself, by naming what others pretend not to see. For men, this courage looks like shifting from silent endurance to intentional action. It means recognizing that strength is not measured by how much pain you can absorb, but by how much truth you're willing to speak. Even when your voice shakes or your position feels fragile, women bring a different kind of courage, one shaped by empathy, observation, and the instinct to maintain emotional safety. When they call out toxicity, they often do it with a precision that cuts through excuses and exposes the impact on relationships and morale. Their courage reminds us that emotions are not liabilities, they're indicators of what is broken and what needs to be repaired. Courage becomes contagious when spoken with clarity and respect. When a man says, "This isn't acceptable," others who have been silent suddenly feel seen. When a woman articulates what everyone has been feeling, the room finally exhales. And when both stand together, one bringing directness, the other bringing emotional intelligence, the culture shifts faster than anyone expects. Because toxicity may grow in silence, but it dies the moment someone chooses to speak with conviction, not confrontation. Your values become the strongest form of protection when the environment around you becomes unpredictable. Men often navigate toxic cultures by putting on a tough exterior, believing that resilience means absorbing negativity without letting it show. But toughness isn't armor. Values are. When a man is grounded in what he stands for, he no longer reacts to the chaos around him. He responds to the standards within him. Integrity, respect, and honesty become shields that prevent him from becoming the very thing he's trying to endure. Without values, he bends to the environment. With values, he shapes it. Women experience the same need for internal armor, but they often carry it in a different way. While men are taught to power through, women are often taught to keep peace, to harmonize, to avoid disruption, even when something feels fundamentally wrong. Yet when a woman chooses to lead from her values, she stops shrinking to make others comfortable. She stops softening her instincts, her voice, her clarity. Her values give her permission to speak truth without apology and to refuse behaviors that betray her sense of dignity. Values give her structure in places where emotional safety is missing. Leading with values relentlessly means refusing to compromise them for convenience or approval. Men struggle with this because a toxic workplace often rewards compliance over character. They fear losing status, opportunity, or respect if they stand firm. But every time a man compromises what matters to him, he chips away at the identity he worked years to build. Eventually, he doesn't just lose trust in the culture, he loses trust in himself. When he leads with values instead, he earns a deeper, quieter form of respect, even from people who never say it out loud. Women, on the other hand, confront a different challenge, the fear of being labeled difficult when they enforce their boundaries. Toxic cultures often manipulate women into believing that self-respect is aggression. But the moment a woman honors her values, she sends a clear message about how she expects to be treated. She shifts the dynamic not by fighting harder, but by standing taller. Her values become the rules of engagement, the terms under which she agrees to participate. Values give both men and women a constant reference point in environments that feel unstable. They remind you who you are when the workplace tries to turn you into someone you're not. And when you lead with your values consistently, you force the culture to confront its own behavior, because nothing threatens toxicity more than someone who refuses to abandon what they believe in. You can't fix a toxic culture while simultaneously allowing the behaviors that create it. Men often fall into this trap without realizing it because many are conditioned to tolerate discomfort as proof of strength. They convince themselves that being unbothered is a virtue, that ignoring disrespect shows maturity, that enduring unfairness earns respect. But every time a man lets a harmful comment slide or absorbs someone else's aggression to keep the peace, he reinforces the very system he hopes will change. Boundaries aren't signs of weakness, they're signs that you know your worth and refuse to let others diminish it. Women experience this struggle differently, often sensing toxicity sooner, but hesitating to enforce limits out of fear of being misunderstood. Many women have learned to adapt, to accommodate, to carry the emotional weight of the environment, so others feel more comfortable. Yet the more they absorb, the more the culture takes advantage of their silence. When a woman sets firm boundaries, she disrupts the expectation that she will always bend. She communicates that respect isn't negotiable and that her empathy is a strength, not a permission slip for mistreatment. Real boundaries require consequences, not just declarations. Men often say, "I'm not okay with that," but then continue engaging as if nothing happened, sending a mixed message that the behavior can continue. When a man decides that certain lines cannot be crossed, no matter who crosses them, he sets a standard that others can't ignore. His boundary becomes a mirror, reflecting the culture's behavior back at itself. It's not confrontation, it's clarity, it's choosing self-respect over acceptance. Women bring a different power to boundary setting, one rooted in emotional intelligence and a sharp awareness of motive and impact. When a woman says, "This isn't acceptable," she's not just naming the behavior, she's naming the harm. And when she follows that truth with action, whether it's distancing herself or escalating the issue, she shifts the culture by refusing to carry its emotional burden. Her boundaries remind the workplace that kindness does not equal tolerance and gentleness does not equal compliance. Boundaries that bite are boundaries that change behavior. They are not rigid walls, but protective edges that define how you will participate in the environment around you. Both men and women reclaim their power the moment they stop enabling what hurts them. Because a toxic culture cannot sustain itself when people refuse to play by its rules, finding allies is one of the most powerful ways to survive and eventually transform a toxic culture. Men often resist this idea because they're conditioned to believe they must handle challenges alone. Admitting you need support can feel like admitting defeat, and many men fear being seen as incapable or unsure. But isolation doesn't make you stronger, it makes you vulnerable. When a man surrounds himself with people who share his principles, not just his frustrations, he gains clarity, confidence, and the reassurance that he's not fighting an invisible battle by himself. Allies turn self-doubt into direction. Women understand the importance of support intuitively, but they often struggle to know whom they can truly trust in a toxic environment. Many women have experienced situations where their vulnerability was misunderstood or used against them, so they learn to stay guarded. Yet when a woman finds even one genuine ally, someone who listens without judgment and stands with her without hesitation, she regains emotional grounding. She stops feeling like she has to navigate everything alone. Allies give her room to breathe, to think, and to speak with courage she may not have accessed by herself. Allies challenge you to rise, not retreat. Men sometimes surround themselves with people who echo their frustrations rather than elevate their actions. These echoes create a false sense of solidarity, but offer no real solution. Real allies confront you when you're slipping into bitterness or resignation. They remind you who you are, what you stand for, and what kind of work environment you deserve. Their support isn't flattery, it's accountability rooted in mutual respect. Women often gravitate toward emotional echoes as well, people who validate their feelings but don't help them move forward. Validation feels comforting, but it doesn't create change. Genuine allies help women reconnect their emotions to action. They encourage them to speak up, to assert their boundary, to trust their intuition. These allies don't just empathize, they empower. And in a toxic environment, empowerment is oxygen. A circle of trust becomes the foundation for resilience in cultures where trust is lacking. When men and women intentionally choose people who share their values, respect their boundaries, and encourage their authenticity, they create a support system strong enough to withstand the impact of a broken workplace. This circle becomes a safe place to process, reflect, and plan. It becomes the reminder that even in the most toxic environments, you are never meant to stand alone and never meant to carry the weight in silence. Small acts of integrity become the quiet force that slowly dismantles a toxic work culture from within. Men often underestimate the impact of these small actions because they are socially conditioned to believe that only dramatic gestures or bold confrontations create real change. They think that if they can't fix everything at once, then their effort doesn't matter. But integrity is not measured in grand moments. It's measured in the everyday choices that prove who you are when no one is watching. When a man chooses honesty over convenience, respect over ego, and fairness over fear, he becomes a stabilizing presence in an unstable environment. His small actions send a message that dignity still has a place here. Women, on the other hand, often express integrity through emotional consistency and intuitive awareness. They notice the subtle shifts in tone, the unspoken discomfort, the quiet disrespect that others ignore. When a woman responds with kindness instead of sarcasm, clarity instead of avoidance, and truth instead of silence, she introduces a different energy into the room. These small acts create subtle disruptions in a culture built on distrust. They remind others that empathy has power and that emotional courage reshape the atmosphere without raising a voice. Her actions spark change not through force but through presence. Integrity gains its influence through repetition, not recognition. Men frequently feel pressure to conform, especially when the culture rewards behavior that contradicts their values. Yet every time a man refuses to participate in gossip, chooses not to laugh at a belittling joke, or quietly supports someone who's being marginalized, he shifts the gravitational pull of the environment. These actions may seem insignificant, but they are the seeds that eventually grow into expectations. People begin to see what respect looks like, and they start wanting more of it. Women often carry the emotional labor in workplaces, and integrity becomes their way of refusing to let toxicity define them. When a woman chooses to remain consistent, even when others are inconsistent, she sets a standard without saying a word. Her integrity signals that negativity will not dictate her behavior. It becomes a boundary in itself, a promise to herself that she will not mirror the environment she's trying to rise above. Over time, others take notice. They begin adjusting their own behavior in her presence because integrity is disarming. It disrupts patterns people didn't even realize they were following. Small acts of integrity accumulate into cultural momentum. When men and women consistently choose what's right over what's easy, they create micro breaks in the armor of toxicity. These moments build trust where trust has been lost, accountability where avoidance has taken root, and humanity where fear once dominated. Integrity doesn't demand recognition, it demands consistency. And when practiced by enough individuals, even in the smallest ways, it begins to shift the entire workplace towards something healthier, safer, and more human. Walking away becomes an act of self-respect. Every effort to create change is met with resistance, denial, or manipulation. Men often struggle with this truth because they're conditioned to believe that quitting equals failure. They're taught to persevere at all costs, to push harder, to man up and endure. But endurance becomes harmful when it traps a man in an environment that erodes his confidence and identity. When a workplace refuses to change, staying becomes self-betrayal. Protecting yourself isn't about giving up, it's about refusing to sacrifice your mental health, your values, and your dignity for a culture that refuses to grow. Walking away with purpose means choosing your well-being over your pride. Women face a different internal conflict when deciding to leave toxicity behind. They often fear being misunderstood, judged, or dismissed as emotional or overreactive. Many women stay far longer than they should because they believe they can adapt, ease the tension, or carry the emotional weight for everyone else. But emotional labor has limits, and when a culture refuses to acknowledge its damage, a woman's compassion becomes a tool the environment exploits. Protecting herself means recognizing that her worth is not tied to her ability to manage dysfunction. It means choosing a place where her voice isn't minimized and her boundaries don't require constant defense. Protecting yourself in a toxic environment is not an impulsive decision, it's a strategic one. Men often approach this realization logically, weighing risks and rewards, calculating the financial and professional impact. Yet the deeper cost often goes ignored, the slow erosion of self-belief. Every day spent in a toxic space chip away at the conviction that he deserves respect. Walking away becomes the moment he stops negotiating with his own worth. It's the decision to stop proving himself to people who are committed to misunderstanding him. Women approach this moment through a blend of instinct and emotional clarity. They feel the shift before they can articulate it. The moment their body stops cooperating, the moment their intuition grows louder than their fear. Protecting themselves means trusting that instinct and honoring the emotional data that tells them they are not safe, valued, or supported. When a woman chooses to walk away, she's not escaping conflict. She's reclaiming ownership of her story. Walking away with purpose means choosing direction, not departure. Men often fear the void that comes after leaving, worried about what comes next or how they'll be perceived. But purpose fills that gap. It reframes the decision. You're not walking away from something, you're walking toward something better, a place that aligns with your values, a culture that reinforces your strengths, a future that rewards the person you are, not the mask you were forced to wear. Women may fear the emotional backlash, the guilt, the self-doubt, the opinions of others. But purpose becomes the anchor that steadies them. It turns uncertainty into clarity and turns fear into movement. A purposeful exit reminds them that their contributions deserve a place where they are respected, not tolerated. A toxic environment that will not change is not your responsibility to fix. Protecting yourself becomes the only path that honors your integrity. Walking away with purpose becomes a declaration that your life, your mental health, and your future matter more than the comfort of staying where you no longer belong.